So welcome to today's session. Want to say hello to everyone at Treasury 360 and thanks for allowing us to do this session with you guys. What we're going to focus on today is, well, post-pandemic, working from home, flexible working, what's the world going to be like from here on? And what do we think about it as well? And I've got two amazing treasurers with me today. Firstly, I'd like to introduce Kemi Bolarin. Lovely Kemi, who I've known for many years, is now recently become the Director of Treasury at 𝐓𝐶𝐞 Telecom. I'll get her to do a short intro about what GTT are in a moment. And we've got the lovely Anthony Mercer, worked for a number of blue chips, Treasury Consulting at the moment, but we've got GSK, Smiths, and most recently STA Travel. So again, he can do a little intro there from his lovely, beautiful background there and another virtual background as we all get all used to the world of virtual. We'll go through it. But joking aside, well, actually, we'll go around the group firstly. I'll get Kemi to do a little intro. Anthony we'll come back to me. And you know me, I run the Treasury Recruitment Company, recruit you guys globally. If you need a new job, call us. If you need to recruit, call us. There you go. That was easy. Nice sales pitch. But joking aside, Kemi, let's go to you first. Can you just explain your background briefly and go from there?
Yes, thank you, Mike. And yes, I've known Mike for so many years. He got me a job, how many years ago? About 20 odd years ago, but there you go. And my name is Kemi, as Mike has said. 25 years in the Treasury world. I love it and I still love it. Recently, I started with GTT Communications as Director of Treasury. Again, I wasn't expecting it, the benefits of lockdown as it is. So GTT Communications is a multinational telecommunications and internet service provider. They're headquartered in Virginia, and they operate what you call the Tier 1 IP network, it's sort of deep sea water fiber cables. They also provide transport and infrastructure, data centers, internet, quite essential services as we all navigate the pandemic and all working from home, remote working. We definitely need the infrastructure to get us going and get us connected. So that's me in a snapshot.
You guys were the ones that kept us all talking. Fantastic. Thank you very much for that. Thanks for your contribution. Keep up the good work. Mr. Mercer, over to you. Just a brief background of you, if you would.
Oh, pleasure to be with you all today. So like Kemi, I've been in Treasury for quite a few years now. So it's about 20 years in Treasury. I started with GSK back in 1999 in their Treasury team as a Treasury dealer and worked in a number of roles with them through managing different FX and investment and debt portfolios for them before moving into a middle office role. And then from STA, I spent some time at Smiths Group, which was another international blue chip, as Mike mentioned, across many continents, involved in oil exploration, IT infrastructure, airplanes, lots of quite exciting engineering and technical stuff. And then just latterly, up until last summer, I was with STA Travel for about 8 years, a role that Mike got me. And I was a finance director with them in charge of the financial services and treasury team. So that managed a team of 80 across 3 locations, including a treasury team that was split across 3 locations. And just recently, I've moved into some treasury consulting work, supporting a number of medium and small size businesses to look at their financial team structures and think about risk portfolio and risk management, and working with a couple of startups, helping them doing their 5-year business plans for presentation to VC and PE. Awesome. But as ever, talking to Mike at the moment, so hopefully there'll be something new on the horizon at some point.
We'll keep talking. Let's think back, and a lot of people are sort of trying to forget about what it was like. But last February, everyone's talking about maybe flexible working. It's maybe we'll do a day from home a week, or maybe a bit of a Friday afternoon, something like that. And they're all having the chats. That's fine. And then we're the worst April Fool's joke ever happened, and 2 months later, everyone's working from their living rooms or kitchens or bedrooms. How did you each, forgetting or putting to one side the businesses, because Kemi, you were a different business then as well, but, what did you see the impact of Treasury? And then what we'll do is we'll go through for the two of you, and then we'll sort of probably also maybe combine it if it's the right time about the businesses, particularly with Anthony, he was, with a travel company. So that was, really hitting you guys hard as much as anything. But, more just, how did you see this happening? How did it affect you then? And what we'll then do is about we'll get to the end of that and then focus on the future, because that's what people watching today will be thinking. Yeah, we were there. What were your personal experiences? So Kemi, first of all.
Thank you, Mike. As it was, yes, completely unprecedented. For us, we actually broke up earlier, I think a week earlier than the whole nation did. And just within that sort of week, naturally you find that treasury teams are small, right? So you've got fewer members compared to other more sizable finance functions. So quite nimble to get together and have a protocol in place. For us, it was about how can we replicate our sort of physical work at home, working in different areas remotely. So we came across, we did set up a protocol around a daily check-in, just so that we replicate that around sort of the coffee room chat. We would then set the day's priority around what we're going to do. And most importantly, I think for us, the four of our thought was around connecting, continuing that sort of human connection with our colleagues. Very, very strange times. I think immediately you could tell there was a distinction between those that were techie savvy and the ones that weren't techie savvy. Within the company as well, you could see the raid for infrastructure around cables, the ones that know the HDMI cables to go for, the laptop monitors. It was just incredible. It was like a tsunami of equipment. Again, these are things that you don't even think about. So again, it was the quickest person got the best of the equipment. But then, fast forwarding to the first week at home, it did feel strange. But for most of us, particularly my personal experience, was the fact that, I could save 2 hours of commuting to work. It would usually take me about 2 hours to 2 hours fro. So for me, that was a benefit, and I was excited about that. But as we continued into the pandemic, and it looked like it wasn't going to be a month, it wasn't going to be 3 months, it wasn't going to be half a year, it was going to be a year, then the novelty of it started to wear out. And that was where I started to observe, the sort of the blurred line between life and work. For me, it was just coming downstairs and my working hours became longer and longer. What I then found out personally is the fact that I had to personally reset. We had to also reset within the group, ensuring that, we had that sort of regular interaction with our colleagues, touching base, ensuring that they weren't did too many hours. If I logged on and found that my direct report was still on, I was immediately getting on the phone to her to say, you need to really shut it down. What are we doing? For me, I must say that enjoyed is not the right word to use. But in a way, I think the transition was a welcome transition, a transition that enabled us actually come to the conclusion that actually you can work remotely and be efficient. You can work remotely and still achieve your goals. We just have to be more organized. We had to be more structured. We had to be more disciplined in the way that we delivered our deliverables. Within the Treasury team being custodians of business assets as well as business information, it meant that cybersecurity was very important for us. So we had a very good conversation around what sort of protocols could we put in place to ensure that we're delivering our Treasury value in a safe and a secure manner. So in terms of the cybersecurity, any payments that were off-cycle, payments that were not going directly from the ERP straight to the back end of the bank, we made sure that we implemented a protocol around approving that process. So we did a video, so it had to be a video approval. So again, it was about adapting the way we worked, leaving the traditional ways behind, ensuring that we were connected through our daily check-in on a day-to-day basis, being aware of our sort of mental state, our emotional well-being as well, and ensuring that no one was overburdened with too much work. No one is over-Zoomed, with this sort of Zoom meetings. Yeah.
We're on Zoom now. We're over-Zoomed. I felt bad. I wanted to send you some gifts to say, sorry, we're going to go on Zoom again. So my apologies. But we've got no choice in that. Now, I'm going to come back to the personal side of things. We talked the work stuff. You had lots of great work stuff there.
Yeah.
I don't want to talk about that in a minute. I want to talk
Okay.
about the personal side and things like
Yes.
that. We're going to go to Anthony. So we're going to focus there on the work side of things. And then we're going to come back to Kemi, because I want to talk, yeah, we've got efficiency, but have we got collaboration? And I'll bring out a couple of examples, some of the podcasts. Anthony, going to you, let's talk about the work side of things. You know, again, February, ticking along, boom. You know,
so I was slightly ahead of the curve on this, mainly because we had a Chinese division, and that had pretty much ceased trading towards the end of December, middle of January. Things have been slightly ahead of pace in China, and it meant that we'd already started to see movement across cities slow down. A lot of travel within China at that point in time was very within China and China to other parts of Asia. And already we'd seen Chinese activity come back a wee bit. But also I was quite fortunate in that SJ Travel, where I worked at the time, the role I had baked into my contract was split location. So I spent 2 days a week at home and 3 days a week in the office. And I also spent 1 to 2 weeks on the road each month. So, you know, at our shared service center in Romania or at our shared service center in Manchester. So there was a lot of moving around anyway. And because of that, was fortunate in that I had a lot of equipment at home, but was also used to working on the fly. Again, I was very fortunate that I drove into the office in central London every day and parked in central London, and that hour commute that I had each day, like yourself, Kemi, that was when I ran those scrums anyway. So every morning it was 2 or 3 calls in the car with the different teams around the world, even before the pandemic hit. But then once the pandemic hit, the focus completely changed. Treasury always has, I think, a really important position to play in any company. And there's a prominence and an import to being a treasurer and being able to communicate risk clearly to all the stakeholders within a business. At this point in time, as things really settled end of February into March, and we started to move all the teams remotely, there was a lot of challenges, exactly as you said, around moving people to that remote working, getting them to have their equipment at home, particularly teams who didn't have laptops. You don't know how many courier services I arranged across March to move seats, desks, you know, stacks, desktops all out to people's homes and make sure everybody had a headset, you know, which is a strange thing to say, but a lot of our teams weren't on the phone very often. So it was, you know, getting them headsets and all that kind of stuff as well. But it was also, you know, for us, you know, SJ Travel had a lot of young people. So I think the average age of our workers was mid-20s, and a lot of those people lived at home with their parents. So, you know, it was then a case of how do you get somebody to work safely from home? It's not just getting them to work from home, but getting to a place where they can work safely from home. So, you know, to a lot of what you talked about, collaboration was really important. And, you know, we had teams and we had other bits and pieces that we used for that already. But a really important thing that happened very quickly around that February, March time was bringing together what we called a war room of key stakeholders within the business. And I think that the entire business used the phrase cash burn more often than any other phrase over that whole pandemic. You would have thought COVID would be the most common phrase, but actually cash burn was. And as a war room group, as an executive team, we had to really focus on what are we spending every penny on and why are we spending it on that? And is there any way for us to avoid spending that money? Because really, like every other company, you know, particularly in the hospitality section, we were no longer selling. So all we had was expense. We had nothing coming in the door anymore. And actually we had the double whammy of you're spending on shops and people who can't do what they're there to do, but also you've got to refund all your customers, or you've got to refund as many customers as you can. So, the cash burn was quite intense for pretty much the first 3 to 4 months, and then things changed. And, unfortunately, SJ Travel was a business that didn't qualify for much of the government support loans. We were lucky enough to qualify for furlough in many countries, but there was no government support loans that we could access. So as an executive team, again, looking at our investor base, going to them and talking to them about, again, that phrase, cash burn, this is the risk, this is what's impacting the business, this is what we're going to need from you to fund us for the next 12 to 18 months. And, as somebody who's been steeped in travel, as Mike said, for the last 8 years, most countries are not going to open their borders to international travel until June or July of 2022. Yeah. So that's a long time for that industry to wait for some recovery.
Yeah. So let's focus a little bit more on the relationships then, and then perhaps internal, just to qualify as well. as a recruitment business here, I've just been making some notes. We're all about our relationships, and they didn't get put on hold. But the fact was, I love seeing you both for coffee or a drink and a catch up about your careers and everything else. And for us as a business, it got paused. Literally the pause button. It's like, well, we're not going to recruit for March, April, May. Nobody's going to move jobs in a pandemic. Why would you? There was a little bit of operational stuff, but we got through it. We had some very good international clients, but that was the external bit of the business, where we're talking to people about recruitment per se. And, again, I'm not going to make it a sales pitch. What I did find is, certainly in my head, I had to get around new ways of working. My colleague Carly, she now is based, certainly for the time being, still working from home. And actually, just as Anthony put it, we had everything in place, so we Skype, we Zoom, we do whatever we have to. But actually, I'm looking forward to seeing her for a coffee and actually a bit of face-to-face and things like that. But one thing I noticed here, and I just scribbled it down here, is who was looking after you guys? Obviously, you were looking after your teams, and looking after them. And Kemi, you mentioned about, getting together and connecting. How were their personal lives and things? Without prying too much, were your CFOs asking you the same? Were they asking, how are you getting on and things like that? And in a minute, I'll change the order because I don't feel it's fair to always pick on Kemi. Actually, let's keep doing it. But no, Kemi, how were you getting through that? Was there mindfulness? Was there other stuff? How were you, and how did it work for you?
It was pretty much so. I mean, we had a situation where our CFO was a very people-led person. That would be the first question, for any of the Zoom Teams meeting that we had, is how are you guys holding up? The good thing about the sort of the Zoom, the team meetings, is the fact that you get to see people as people. You start to see the cats, walk across the laptop, the kids that come to perch on mommy's legs or daddy's legs, what have you, somebody, the partner making coffee, behind the camera somewhere. So there was a lot of, I think that was one bit that got highlighted for me, in as much as, yes, we take for granted the sort of impromptu tea room conversation. That was quickly replicated within our team meetings. I think I'm lucky enough to say that I worked for very good, caring group of people, whereby the meetings were actually the starter for any meeting is, how are you guys holding up? Are you guys bearing well? What's your situation like? Particularly for people that were living alone, because you could see that almost immediately, because you have that sense of isolation. Sometimes you have that sense of being disconnected. For me personally, I felt like I was looked after by my leaders, in that they would always ask that question, and it was genuine. It wasn't a tick box exercise. It would be, Kemi, how are you holding on? They will soon hear me talk to my daughter across the wall anyway, and say, oh, okay, yeah, Kemi, we heard that.
She can have it in a minute. Get off the internet.
Exactly. How is the study going? Yes, that was a very good discussion as well. How is the study going on? So, and as that was happening to me, I was able to pass that down to my team as well. It's about being emotionally aware. It's about, connecting with the people's well-being and their mental state. Very, very important. And that was key for us at Travelport.
I know I'm going to look towards the future as well in a second, and we'll double ask you the question, Auntie. So come on, it's time to get your own back, because Kemi's had all of them. So, again, you were talking about then talking to all of your teams in each of the locations and things. Prior to this, it was all about, the practical treasury business of treasury. But, was that, I know, we're friends and stuff, and, so you've got a very, warm personality, you're going out there and, talking to those guys. Did that change, though, even more, that you had to become more of a friend to your teams? Or, how did you, guys cope?
I think it's a really good question. People management is one of the hardest skills to learn, and getting that balance right between being a manager or a leader and being a colleague or a friend is a difficult thing. I think it's one of the hardest skills we all have to work at, and we all have to keep working at. During that initial spring and early summer, when things were at its height here in the UK, in particular with the lockdowns in the UK and everyone having to work remotely, and also having to make hard decisions about who you kept in the team and who you put on furlough, and then trying to explain to those teams why you'd made those decisions. They were some of the hardest times I think I've had in my career so far, and particularly to the point where in some countries where we couldn't qualify for that support, actually having to have conversations with people in the middle of a pandemic that you're letting them go. These were difficult times, and these were some really hard conversations. But as much as you cared, or as much as I could, or as much as I can, I've always tried to keep a respectful distance as well as being a leader. And I try not to be too much of a friend to the people who work in the teams I work in, because you always have to have a little bit of distance. Yeah. But what I think I learned during the pandemic was you do have to take a little bit more interest in people. You know, we had a really good focus in the teams at the time around, you know, to Kemi's point, around mental health, and particularly around people who were in slightly more difficult situations working remotely. You know, I mean, I have 3 young children and a fantastic wife, and you know, she took the vast line of the work that was done when they were having to be taught from home, and I'm incredibly lucky that I was in that position. But I was also incredibly conscious not everybody I worked with and everybody who worked for me was as fortunate as me at that time. And because of that, you had to learn to adapt to those individual circumstances, but it did stretch the day. It really did stretch the day. So, you know, when you were having those contact points and starting to talk each day about what are our priorities, what do we need to focus on, what data do we need to produce, or which financial partners do we need to talk to, you had to work out how you piece the day around those other pressures that people had. And you had to bend a little, because if we didn't bend a little, we were all going to break.
Yeah.
And I think that was one of the tough parts of working during the pandemic, actually.
And I move on in a minute, or a short while before we reach the end of today's session, to, you know, as the future and what it looks like, and this, you know, new way of working, new blended, hybrid, whatever way you want to call it. But before we do that, I'm just going to come back to something for both of you, and I'll ask Anthony first, and then, you know, Kemi can copy some of your answers. That's fine. You carry on. It's always good. That blurring line of home working, and, you know, I know that one of my friends was a treasurer, Andy, he basically went out, forced himself to go out for a lunch walk. Him, the dog, his wife, every lunchtime. That was it. And he switched off his phone. Well, he left his phone at home. He just said, just no, you know, and he got used to that and had to do that. And this blurred home life, you know, I've got some of the notes here. You know, I did it on an ACT panel, the commute from, you know, previously getting on the train, you'd had an hour, you know, traveling, got your head into the workspace, and then an hour back, and you were, yeah, you might be on the train, you might be driving, but, you know, you might be then reading a book, you might be Netflix, you might be doing whatever. Suddenly it stopped. You know, you had this, you know, 8 o'clock, switch on your piece. Oh, actually, got to go on with this. Yeah. And suddenly 8 o'clock, you're switching it off. Now, how did you, you know, did you find that difficult with that blurred line maybe, or was it a distinct line over time? Or, you know, Anthony, going to you first, and then we'll come to yourself, Kemi.
In the last, I'd say 15 years, I've been lucky, and also I've been lucky to work in roles that meant that you're managing financial relationships in Asia, in Europe, yep, and in North America at the same time. So I think most people in Treasury, in international businesses, will be used to having some flexibility about how they work, whether that's up at 4:30 in the morning to talk about to a bank in Auckland, or up at 10 in the evening to talk to a bank in LA. You know, it's you've got to manage those things around you. And I think because of that, a lot of treasurers have that skill already.
Yep.
But I did find that because as a family unit, everybody's in the house at the same time, you had to be a bit more flexible with that. And a lot of the partners we worked with were actually fortunate to support us in that flexibility. And I think you had to try and drive as much structure as you could into your day. That's how I found I had to work anyway. So I benefited immensely from being able to have breakfast and lunch and dinner with the whole family during lockdown, which is something I don't think I would ever have had if we hadn't gone through this. And I do count myself lucky for being able to have that experience. But at the same time, there was definitely stress points where you know, we were out there trying to drum up cash to support the business, or trying to renegotiate a facility that we had, and trying to do all that kind of work remotely and get all the team engaged and all the team working to the same end game at the same point in time was incredibly difficult. And I think I don't mind saying, Mike, and Mike knows this, 𝐓𝐶 Travel unfortunately did not survive the pandemic. And as directors of the business, we had to make a decision in August last year of closing that business down and moving it into liquidation. And it was an incredibly hard thing to do with all the passion and energy and support that everyone had poured into it, but it was also the right decision to make. And I think that's stuff that has gone on during this pandemic that I will never learn again as much as I've learned during this time. And it's looking for the positives in this as much as all those hard things we all went through.
Kemi, over to you. Follow that. Brilliant.
Yes.
Word. Sorry, that makes a nice change. You stunned me into silence for a change. Mr. Mercer, bloody hell. You were so intelligent. Jesus. Wow.
I mean,
God. Kemi, come on, follow. Good luck. Yeah.
Yes, it's everything. Yeah, I would just say that everything that Anthony said, plus, more. I mean, in terms of, yes, I mean, the novelty of working from home, it took me about 2 weeks to then suddenly realize that, oh yeah, I needed to put structure in place. And that was really needed, because the first 2 weeks we were busy trying to replicate our work life, making sure that we had everything going. Also, my mindset was a mindset of visibility. I wanted my leaders to feel like, oh yeah, I was there, I was present. But then by the end of 2 weeks, I needed to change that round, because I just needed that structure. I knew something was missing. Getting up in the morning, driving to work, coming back was a bit of structure, and I needed to replicate that. So then what did I do was creating very clear space around work, creating very clear space around life. And also I took on walking as well. So I would, as soon as it's 5 p.m., if there's nothing to do, there's nothing urgent to do, I would go out for a very long walk. And that brought sanity back. And it's the same thing with my family. For kids, I've got 2 kids, 16 and 18. And again, it was a different way of working for them, also ensuring that they had a safe space for their homeschooling. So it was pretty much adapting to new ways of working, making sure that the mindset is nourished, making sure that the mental well-being is nurtured, staying organized, staying in control. So I took on all kinds. I mean, I think I said, Mike, in one of my other sort of talking engagements, where I mentioned that I took on minimum 30 minutes of topping up on my skills using LinkedIn Learning. Again, I wouldn't have done that in the sort of the hustle and bustle of driving to work and coming back. So very good experience, although it took a while to get used to it. But I must say that it's given me a very, very good family time, being able to have dinner together, as Anthony has said, being able to even prepare our meals, think about the meals and make it a worthy experience for the family at the end of each day.
Yeah. Now, as we come towards the end of today's session, and what I'll do, we will put your details in the show notes. So I've got a couple more questions and things. And again, we'll come to Anthony first on this one. But what I want to do is, look at coming out of the pandemic and now what the new world is going to look like in the new world of work. So I'll ask that to both of you. And then, we'll just wrap up with your, perhaps a couple of final tips, so you can sort of think about those, maybe reflect on, for people watching today, what they should think about as they come out of it. Before I do that with you, Anthony, and about this sort of, I want to focus then on sort of, we had on some of the notes actually about, the world of Treasury, where does it go to and stuff. I'm less bothered about that really. Everyone's here is Treasury professionals watching today, potentially, but it's more about work life, or work, the future of work, not life so much, how it fits in. But we were just talking before this session today that I've got a future podcast coming up with a guest. He's a treasurer. I've spoken to him, know him very well. And he thinks that, it'd be a great podcast because he thinks that this working from home, flexible working is a fallacy. His thoughts are, we're going to return to, at some stage, renegotiation of rents, but, have offices again, everyone's going to be commuting every day. I don't potentially agree with that wholeheartedly. I think there was a mixed way and things have evolved. And we talked about that as a group before. So reflecting maybe back on that, or back to you, Anthony, what would you say you see it as going from here?
I think instinctively, I think it's going to be a blend. I think certain institutions are already saying quite vocally in the market that they want their teams back in the office, and they don't they don't want to support remote working, and I can see benefits to that. I can also see, you know, some weaknesses to that, in that, you know, it might be that they're less attractive to certain types of future employees. And I mean, my personal view is that businesses need to evolve with the workforce, and part of that workforce need is going to be a want to focus a little bit on work-life balance. I think we'd already seen that pre-pandemic. I think when you talk to a lot of millennials and Gen Z, you know, there's a lot of what they're looking for in terms of reward, in terms of recuperation, and the whole package, and how they want to live their lives is very different to how I wanted them to live my life when I was 22, 23, straight out of uni. And I think we just need to acknowledge that. And I think part of that as leaders in any industry is going to be listening to your workforce and getting the balance right between the direction you want to take your business in and how you want to optimize the workforce to facilitate that. And that all sounds a little bit jingoistic and a little bit, you know, business bollocks, for want of a better phrase, but I do think we have to take our time and think about what we want. I personally think it'll be a blend. You know, all the teams that I'm talking to at the moment in different places, they are seeing this as an opportunity to cut one of their biggest costs. You know, rent and overheads is a massive cost. And people are, you know, one project I've recently worked on with somebody was around remuneration and how they slightly adjust people's salaries to allow for more remote working, and adjusting it so that they're not paying themselves for mobile phone bills or for internet, but there's a slight uptick in people's salaries so that it covers those costs. And the trade-off for that business is it will be able to potentially exit three office locations in major UK cities and potentially relocate to one West Country location instead as a more flexible working space. Now, you know, that's going to give significant savings on people's balance sheet. And there's a lot of complexity around IFRS 16 and lease accounting now anyway. So if you can simplify all that anyway, you know, there's lots of soft benefits that come through as well as making savings on that space. But personally, I don't think the profile of cities is going to change massively. It will shift, but I think it's going to be a blended approach going forwards. Well, at least that's my view.
Again, Kemi, before we wrap up today and we do the sort of, I've got a couple of other bits, but I'm going to come to you. What are your thoughts?
I mean, same as Anthony has said, you know, it will be a hybrid, and I think the workforce will probably shape what then becomes the future of the workspace. Already, you know, in a recently reported newspaper, they're talking about FTSE 100 companies looking at flexible work plans. I mean, it goes without saying that the pandemic has changed our mindset. It's actually shown businesses that it can be done. During the pandemic, in my company, we had two major finances, and we did all the sort of credit agreement negotiation over Zoom and Microsoft Teams. Pre-pandemic, it probably wouldn't have been thought of. So the issue is just giving employees that opportunity to choose, you know, opportunity to shape their work life the way they deem, you know, suitable. I mean, yes, for me, I would embrace flexibility. Probably it's going to be 3 days working in the office and then 2 days working from home. Again, the key word here is flexibility. For a lot of the companies looking to shared office space as well, I think that's where the challenge will be. Because if we're saying it's flexible and that we're giving employees the opportunity to choose, then it becomes unstructured. So it will be quite a challenge to determine how much office space is redundant and actually be let go and then give you back some money onto your balance sheet. So again, it's about the flexibility. It's about you know, giving us the opportunity to choose. There will be a very good mix there, and I think ultimately the quest for well-being and sort of the mental wellness will probably drive us back more into the office space, because you just welcome that sort of social and human interaction with colleagues away from your sort of family life. But that's also my own personal opinion.
There's one interesting thing you said there, Kemi, for me, which I think is actually quite important. You know, you did 2 successful funding rounds during the pandemic, and so much of a treasurer's work is maintaining not only internal but those external relationships as well.
Yes.
And for me, it was surprising how quickly we all adapted to managing those external relationships. And I really can't wait, as Mike said earlier, for that point when I sit down with my banker and have a cup of coffee or even have a lovely lunch somewhere. We're all missing nice lunches somewhere. But I do think there's a lot of success to be looked at during this. And you can't, in any industry, you can never look at something that you manage to adapt and make a success of and just say, well, now that the clock's gone back 18 months, let's forget all that. You've got to take those learnings forwards. And I agree with everything you've just said. I think we're going to take those learnings forwards.
Yeah, and it's also interesting for me. We do a lot, and our US business is growing rapidly. And actually, I'm just about to recruit a role that's 100% remote, based on the East Coast. Just been doing some work on it today, and it's an interesting, role there. And the person, will never have a fixed office. But then, when with some of my West Coast clients, I've spoken to them, and they're saying, yeah, it's great, we can do remote and everything else. And we save on these offices, particularly in the Silicon Valley, which are extortionately expensive and things like that. Exactly there. The thing about that is how much does that go into the coffers of the company per se, and how much are you going to pay to your stuff? Because they're going, well, actually, before we were having to pay $200,000 for this person. Now, if they're working for remotely nearby us, maybe, it's, at another location, it's over in Utah or something much lower cost base. Well, it's all right. We can get that $200,000 person for $150,000. They can work remotely. We make the saving. Well, hang on, shouldn't you up the price, and maybe meet in the middle, 175? I'm just giving those as example numbers. But I think there is a sort of a pushback from both sides. Well, hang on, I'm still worth that 200. Yeah, I was spending half my salary on cost of living. So I think that's it's less so perhaps in the UK and Europe, but I think there is there's that, and there's more to go with that. Now, I'm going to go Kemi and then Anthony on this. I'd like your closing pieces of advice if I could, because it's been a brilliant session. I love the advice there. What would you say, like I do on my podcast? We'll put on your LinkedIn profile in the show notes so people can look at your backgrounds and things like that. But in this case, as people are looking at this new blended way of working, we've talked about that. We've got some great advice from Anthony, but some of his international teams, and Kemi, you were talking about, really supportive CFOs and everything else. But what advice would each of you give to the treasury professionals looking today, if they're, junior guys and trying to balance their lives, or if they're senior treasury professionals and managing their teams? You've been both and seen both from the front line. What sort of nuggets of advice would you give to those guys? Kemi, first of all.
Thank you. I mean, for me, it's been in the moment. It's actually understanding what is life asking of you. What is your work asking of you? As somebody said in one of your podcasts, Mike, work should actually give you energy and not drain your energy. I mean, working remotely sometimes can be draining, as some people think it's comforting, but we just need to be present in the moment, understand what are the positives from actually remote working, what is the positive of social and human interaction. I think the pandemic has actually highlighted the importance of coming out to have that coffee with you, Mike, rather than roll the eyes and say, oh my God, I don't have the time.
Sorry, no, I've had enough coffees this pandemic, all right?
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry to interrupt, but a glass of wine or beer, social time. I love, I often make the joke with treasurers, you guys are the first to the bar and mostly the last to leave it, which is my kind of people. But it's a collaborative, it's, a social.
It's collaborative, yes. It's social, and you begin to add value to it now, because we've all missed it in the last 1 year. And it's mainly because, that was taken away from us. So it's been in the moment. Actually appreciate where we are at the moment, understand, what is your work life? What is your after work life? It is interrelated, it is interconnected. You can't draw a line in the sand, but I think it's just understanding the importance of each experience in our lives, owning, understanding, and appreciating the benefit of it.
Anthony, follow that, mate. Good luck.
Yes. Yeah, I know. I think the only thing I'd add to what Kemi said is, we've all learned during the pandemic the importance of communication and communication tools. And the one communication tool we should all have in our careers, both upwards and downwards, is that one-to-one, is that relationship you have with your immediate superior and other people and the teams who work for you. And one-to-one is a bi-directional conversation. It's not just you talking all the time, which is hard for me to say as I talk far too much. But you know, we've got to empower ourselves, and we've got to empower the people who work for us to be honest with us. So, you know, what I learned during this exercise was to stop and listen to the issues that they're facing at home, or they're facing in the office, or they're facing in what they're doing, and trying to understand how I can manage that. And sometimes through that two-way conversation, you realize it's not going to work. And then together you have to work out how you move things apart, and you potentially move somebody on, or somebody chooses to go. But you've got to have that conversation, and the conversation has got to be bi-directional. It can't just always be you the one talking either up or down. It's got to go both ways. So be honest, be open, and be clear on what you're looking for and where your pinch points are and where your stresses are. Because if they don't know it, if it all blows up, it doesn't look good for anybody. So you've got to manage your career and manage your relationships as much as you manage the people around you.
As I do, I summarize it on the podcast. That's treasurycareercorner.com. Go there. These guys will be on there soon. They don't know it yet, but they will. But that podcast that was referred to is, I think the one was Wade Olson. Did a few about 148, 149. Amazing guy. My first and only ever 2-part podcast, but it was definitely worthwhile. It was
brilliant.
Yeah, he's just an incredible guy. But I'm just going to go through the quick checklist here. So guys out there, you know, using Kemi, being present in the moment, positivity, keep that in mind. Then owning the moment as well. Loving that piece of advice. We'll probably do this in the show notes. Then across to Anthony, then about communication and tools, and, you know, the need one-to-one, openness, empowerment of those guys, and it being two-directional. So going to them, not just you telling them, but then it coming back and taking that on board. And my favorite, I've got to say, and I would say this, and I think actually I speak for both Anthony and I as well, Kemi. Yeah, that's social loads. Yeah, after work socializing, it's all about that. It's, they're saying it's a roaring 20. So
it is.
Well, as always, I can't wait to see you both for a glass of wine, beer, the odd coffee, whatever.
Coffee.
Yeah, anyway, it's been amazing. Thank you both. And can't wait to see you. And I hope guys at Treasury 360 have enjoyed this today. 2 amazing guests, amazing value, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks.